heart, go boldly beyond. Where the fears of heart go boldly beyond.
Hello, my name is Loopop. Thank you very much for listening to this track. I made it for Loopop's SuperBooth 2021 contest, and if you're interested, the rest of this video is going to be a breakdown of how it was made. Let's go! So the first chapter is going to be the setup. I'm using the Elektron Octatrack. Let me make the screen a bit more visible here. The Elektron Octatrack right here, and the Elektron model samples over here. Both playback samples. This one is a groove box and it plays back samples. It's really cool. This one can play back samples and sequence them and stuff like this one, but it can do a lot more. In fact, it's used to process effects as well because it has 8 tracks, but track number 8 is used as a master track. Track number 7 is used to process effects on the model samples. So track 7 is like an effects pedal for this one. So at the end of the day, that means that this one has track 1 through 6 playback samples, and it's the same here. So overall, 12 voices of polyphony for this track. And that's it. If you want to know more about these devices, you can look them up online. There are tons of people who have tons of interesting things to say and show and make you listen to with these. So let's move on to the next chapter. Chapter 2 is going to be the intention behind the track, what made me want to do it the way it is. So in order to choose what track to make, I started with the samples from the contest. So in case you're not familiar with the contest, it's basically a contest where we have a sample pack that we have to use, and we must use only samples from the pack with the exceptions of vocals. Vocals are allowed, and for this one I've used a tiny bit of vocals, but not too much. Mostly I wanted to stay true to the spirit of the contest and the rules, which state that the samples must be heard clearly and that their character must shine through. So hopefully this is what we've done here. So when browsing through the samples for inspiration, I thought they had a very clear science fiction vibe to them. There are a lot of super high quality synth samples in them. Just for a bit more context, they are samples from unreleased synthesizers that were presented at SuperBooth this year, and they are all super inspiring. So to get a kind of sci-fi-esque vibe from them, I decided to go for a space exploration theme. I'm going to do a lot of air quotes today. And that space exploration theme to me needed 2 things. First was to have space, and to have space I needed some pads with a lot of reverb that sounded very eerie and dark and mysterious because, you know, the depth of space. Second, I wanted to have something that sounds like it's driving you forward, and I decided to go with plucky, very rhythm-heavy sounds that sound like a machine, like some kind of clockwork, so that you can have exploration. And so you have space and exploration, and that's great. At least that was the intent. And then I thought, since vocals are allowed, I'm going to add some vocal texture to it because I think it's very interesting. And if I'm allowed to add just one sample, I'm going to make a sample for this track. You have heard the sample already if you have listened to the song, but just to explain my intention, I thought vocals are allowed maybe, but I didn't want the vocals to be overbearing or hide the samples at all. So I've decided two things. First, to go with spoken words instead of singing, so that the vocals are not taking too much room musically speaking and are here for meaning and texture mostly, and don't hold any melodic, harmonic, or rhythmic value, or very little as I can achieve with just samples. So no chopping it up and playing back in a weird, fancy, rhythmic way. I wanted to keep it very simple and just for the texture, basically. And so that was the first step. The second step for me was to only play back the sample over an instrumental section that you have heard without the sample, so that there's never a moment where you're missing out on the character of the samples because of the vocals. So with all of that in mind, you have the space, the exploration, and the vocals that are inspired, by the way, by a lot of music from public service broadcasting. They tend to use a lot of samples from old people talking about Mount Everest or the moon landing or stuff like that, and that's a bit the kind of vibe I wanted to achieve, or at least try to achieve. So that's it for the intentions and the setup. Let's talk a bit about each track so that you can see what's on each one of them. So let's start with the Octatrack. Both have basically 3 patterns. The Octatrack has 4 patterns, though the 4th one is basically a bit like the 3rd one, but it was easier from a performance standpoint to have 4 for me, but I think I could have worked with 3. So just to give you an idea, the sections are a bit of a beginning section, of course, that gives you an idea of the feel of the track. Then you have a kind of a calmer section that sounds like you're lost in space, and it's a bit darker than the rest. It makes you feel like, ooh, maybe I'm lost. And then it gets a bit more dynamic and hopefully a bit more hopeful, and makes you feel like you've reached destination, and it's using a lot of the dynamics and melodies from the first pattern. So let's go for it. The way it's broken down is that mostly the Octatrack, because of its ability to play back long samples and to play them back from the storage instead of the bit of RAM that you have on the model samples, I've used the Octatrack mostly to play back the space part, if you will, and the model samples for the exploration part, so for short, plucky one-shots a lot of the time. So let's go through it. First track on the Octatrack has this sample here. Cool. I use it like as a bass, so let me turn everything else off, and let's listen to this. So you get the idea, it's a bass. Then I've used this sample. Don't worry, I'm going to talk about the samples a bit later on so that you can find which ones I've used. It's going to be super simple, I promise. This sample to have a bit of a kind of an underlying melody, not quite a bass, but a bit like it. And then I've used, I think, the same sample. Oh no, it's another one. To write another melody that kind of harmonizes this with this one. So if you put both together, it gives you this. And this sample is using an LFO that is changing the volume with a square wave, so you have kind of a Tom Morello-esque kill switch effect, where it basically turns the sound on and off quickly, and it gives you this very ratchety sound, which I think is interesting. Without it, it sounds like this. Which I think is cool too, but I like the weird sound. So that's it. Let's move on to the next track. This one is giving you a bit of texture with something that I wanted to sound like some radio effects. It's also using an LFO to reach that effect on the volume, but this time it's random instead of being a square wave. And so it gives you this kind of, radio signal or sonar effect that I thought would be cool and also highlight the space vibe. Here, I don't even remember what's here. There are so many samples. Oh yeah, this one gives you, well, this. Wow, so cool. So it's just a bit of atmosphere, but yeah, it doesn't work anymore. But it gives you just a bit of atmosphere, and that's really cool, to me at least. This one, what is it? Oh yeah. It gives you, again, a bit more emphasis on the key that the song is in, which I don't know what it is because I don't know music theory. Learn music theory, kids. But it basically makes the song, I think, a bit more interesting by basically blending things that are melodically and harmonically rich with things that are a bit more less defined, but having both together, I think, works to create the atmosphere. And if we play back just the Octatrack alone, it sounds like this. So you have the two tracks I made you listen to before that have the melodies on them, and if you remove them, that's the main atmosphere behind the track. And I think that's cool. Let's move on to the samples. The model samples here is using 6 samples as well, but this time it's more one-shots. So you have a kick here, a snare, a hi-hat, you have a plucky woody thing, I think. You have here another sound that is a bit more spacey, sonar-esque again. And here, the same sound again, but used so that they can harmonize together and play melodies together. If you play it, all of it at once, it sounds like this. So that's it. Now let's move on to the next pattern, pattern 2. Pattern 2 is mostly the same, though it's using maybe slightly different samples. Here, to go a bit faster, I'm just going to make you listen to both machines independently so that you can just hear what it has to say. So as you can hear, the Octatrack has a bit of a darker atmosphere this time. And the sample.
Where the fears of heart go boldly beyond.
The vocal sample that I've used some filter with distortion on so that it sounds like an old recording. I wanted to use the lo-fi effect instead because it would have been even more interesting, but the problem is I really needed that filter to remove some bass frequencies, otherwise the bass on the vocal samples were overwhelming. But I didn't re-record it. I could have resampled the sample and have the filter built into the new sample, but I wanted to avoid resampling as much as possible, again to stay true to the rules. I wanted to be as bare bones as possible in manipulating the samples, especially the ones that I've made myself. I wanted the character of every sample to stay, so I did that. It also has some reverb for some epicness. Of course. So it's mostly the same samples with a few exceptions, with no exceptions, I think. It's the same samples, simply sequenced differently to give, again, this kind of a darker vibe. When we go to the model samples exclusively, this next pattern is a bit like the first one. Let's compare the two. So that's the first one again. Let's go back to the second one. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an overview of these patterns. I also have this choir sample that is loaded into the model samples, but I ended up not using it. As you can see, it has no sequencer steps, so it's not doing anything. So here it is, the second part together with the Octatrack. Mysterious. So now let's move on to the third pattern. This time I wanted to bring energy back into the song. Oops. Here it is, some light on the Octatrack screen. So for this pattern, the third one, I wanted to bring back some energy into the mix. So let's listen once again to the Octatrack alone. As you can hear, it's basically coming back to the first pattern, except this time we don't have the higher pitched melody coming back. This one that you can hear. This melody. It's not coming back in the third pattern, so that it builds up a bit. This means that in pattern 3, the role of bringing the energy back is on the model samples part. As you can hear, it's absolutely the most energetic pattern from the model samples. You can't hear anything because of a scene, I'm sure. Here we are. The most danceable one for sure. Okay. So, as you can hear, what's coming that is new is mostly from the model samples, but if you put them together, it gives you this energetic part. Hello again. I lost some footage yesterday, so I thought I had two options, either not talk at all about pattern 4 or reshoot, so here we are. So pattern 4, as I think I mentioned a bit already, is basically the same as pattern 3, except I have 2 extra tracks from the Octatrack that give it even a bit more energy. What it has extra compared to pattern 3 is this melody, the ratchety thing that is coming back, and this new melody right here. So let's focus on it so you can hear it better. It also ratchets using an LFO on the volume and a square wave, but half as fast, and so it gives this effect if you have both together. Which I think is a bit cool. I have slide trigs as well that I mentioned in the outro to this video. I'm doing a bit of time traveling. It's so hard to make you see the Octatrack display. I think this track has slide trigs. So yeah, it changes in pitch. It goes from one note to the next using a slide trig. It's a bit subtle and you can't really hear it in the mix because so much is happening. But that's why I used it, because it's subtle. Instead of jumping from one note to the next, it translates to it, like it transforms. It's really cool. I really like it. So here it is. Now that you have seen how the song is built, I want to give you a quick tour of the folder that I have included in a link in the video description. This will allow you to download all of this. So what is all of this? You have 2 folders. The first one is the archive for the model samples. So if you have one, you can use the files inside to have the model samples part of this performance on your model samples. You have the sample folder, which includes so many samples, in fact, many of which I haven't used, and a sysex file, which will give you access to the 3 patterns. So you add both to your model samples using Elektron Transfer app by connecting your model samples to it. Right now it's trying to connect to my audio interface, but if you have your model samples connected through USB, it will recognize it right away, and you just drag and drop into it, and you should have my project in your model samples. You even have a little README file that will explain to you how to use it. You have the same thing for the Octatrack. It's even simpler for the Octatrack, though it does have a more complex README because it goes into a bit more detail. But the Octatrack, you just have to drag this folder into your Octatrack in any set that you want. And this folder contains the project plus every sample I have used. So it should all work fine, it should all be assigned automatically and not give you any trouble, which is nice. You have a README file, which is about all of it and explain to you what each folder and file does. You also have a sample identifier. This tool allows you to look at all the samples that I have used for this performance that was part of the selection, and it gives you some notes, some specifics, including the names, because I have renamed the samples for my convenience when writing this performance. And so I have made this file so that you can quickly look for the samples I have used and compare them to the originals to check that they are the original ones and have been unedited. So hopefully that makes your searching a bit simpler. And finally, I have made available the voice sample that I use in this track so that you are free to use it in any of your compositions if you're interested in that. Oh, one thing I forgot to talk about is what if some miracle happens and I'm chosen by the gods to win some of the prizes in this contest? Well, then I would be most interested in the super exciting wild stuff such as the Empress Zoia, the Hologram Microcosm, and the SOMA Lab instruments, especially the Lyra 8. I mean, it's so cool. Anyway, off you go to the outro to this video. Last but certainly not least, I wanted to say a quick thank you to some people. First of all, Loopop for making this contest a thing. It was a great challenge for me. I loved doing it. It was very interesting because I was very much deprived of the acoustic sounds that I like most of the time, but also because I loved to take part in this event that I know so many more music makers are going to do some crazy awesome things for, and I can't wait to listen to what everyone has been doing. And I also want to say thank you to Loopop and everyone involved in organizing the event for organizing it. I assume it's a lot of work and I appreciate that a lot. I also want to thank the brands that have decided to participate by making some products of their own, the prizes for this contest. I think it's really cool, very motivating, and makes me at least feel valued as part of the music making community, and I think that's really, really, really cool. I also want to thank the Elektron users community for making those machines behind me a bit less mysterious. I specifically want to thank Lying Dalai, that I've come across a few times on Elektronauts, for making the Octatrack optimized version of this sample pack. It saved me a lot of time and sanity, and I value both, so thank you so much. I also want to thank Dan, I think it's Dan? I'm going to go ahead and say it's Dan from the Messy Desk for making videos about slide trigs. I had never used them before, and the Octatrack manual can be a bit daunting at times, but when it comes to slide trigs, it's how would I put it?
Slide trigs. There's a menu that says slide on it. Caution! Parameters cannot slide to or from unlocked trigless locks.
Yeah, it's not great, so thanks so much for Dan, from the Messy Desk, for making this clear and amazing. It's a great trick. I love it. Check his stuff out if you haven't. And finally, the final thank you goes to you for watching this video all the way through. I hope it wasn't too boring. I hope you liked the track. Anyway, I hope you have a great day. Bye.